Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here.
Hey, welcome to Ruminating with RealAg. I'm your host, Amber Bell, and if you've got cattle on the brain or just a soft spot for all things bovine, you are in the right place. This is the podcast for ranchers, backgrounders, and anyone who's obsessed with cattle, like I am. We're here to chew the cud on everything from the latest in cattle genetics to how to keep your herd happy with rotational grazing, to winter feeding techniques, and pretty much everything in between. So grab your favorite coffee, tea, or whatever keeps you going, and let's get ruminating on all things bovine.
You're listening to Ruminating with RealAg, the podcast that chews on the latest in beef production, with your host, Amber Bell.
Hello, everyone. On this episode of Ruminating with RealAg, I am really looking forward to a great conversation with Betty Jo Almond of AgSights about the importance of genetics in a beef herd. Betty Jo is originally from a commercial beef operation in Eastern Ontario. She graduated from the University of Guelph with an agriculture degree, majoring in animal genetics. And more recently, she's a graduate of the Advanced Agriculture Leadership Program that focuses on experiential executive leadership. Prior to working at AgSights, she was the program lead for several risk management programs, developing a strong understanding of both business and IT needs, abilities, and limitations. Betty Jo has been with AgSights for more than 10 years in various roles related to management solutions and services for beef, sheep, goat, and small to medium-sized meat processing businesses. So welcome. It is fantastic to have you on the show, Betty Jo.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So we're going to be talking about genetics today, which is AgSight's specialty, I understand, right?
Yep, that's the flagship service we've been offering since the beginning over 30 years ago.
30 years ago. So tell me, okay, right off the bat, I had a list of questions. I'm changing it up a little bit. Tell me a bit about AgSight's and what the changes you've seen in 30 years, or the company's seen in 30 years.
Sure. So I've been around for the last 10 or a little bit more, but AgSights was formerly called Beef Improvement Ontario, and it was an organization created from Ontario Cattlemen's at the time, the University of Guelph, and OMAFRA, because there was a need to help farmers with genetic improvement and collecting the data that supported that. So early days, AgSights and Bio at the time administered the red meat program. And it meant that we could help our Ontario farmers see value in the records they were keeping. And then it evolved through time and value chains were created and other project opportunities came along focused on genetic improvement. And so today, our tools are still very heavily focused on beef, but for a small fraction of an investment, we can make those same tools available for sheep and goats and even bison herds. We're working closely with a herd in Lakeland College. And in that space, we've always been focused on what records are needed to support genetic improvement. So maybe about 11 years ago, we partnered with companies in Alberta that were developing a solution for meat businesses to take their product to farmers markets, be able to track it, sell it, and relate that back to the information that they had at home in creating those products. So that the other technology that we support is called BioLinks, and it just continues the story of food production and enables those small to medium-sized businesses to stay in business with businesses like JBS and Cargill and still provide the consumers what they're looking for on the meat that they're buying from their businesses.
That is amazing. And it's a long history. I come from a background that's more custom grazing, bringing in animals, so whether that's yearlings or whatever. And it is interesting, like even on this very small scale, we've gotten to see kind of what the different genetics do on grasslands.
Mhm.
And so I'd imagine your work must be fascinating when you get to see the differences in a much wider base, like from the different herds across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as you start connecting the data that farmers collect with the next stage of production and even with the carcass quality, it's really just unlocking things that we haven't explored too in depth. And that's where I think the small to medium-sized businesses have a lot of potential because they can retain the idea of animals and start to really fine-tune which ones are producing our quality steaks and other products. And where do we need to focus our genetic selection to produce a more consistent product?
Right. And we talk about focus of genetic selection, but of course, from a farm level, you want you do want to produce a good steak that's for the consumer, right? But at the same time, you want animals that are healthy. You want animals that give birth easily. You want like there's a lot of different things to select for. So I it's probably going to sound kind of funny, but is there a list that you have that are like, hey, these are the most important traits that people should be selecting for?
Yeah, so ideally, we wouldn't recommend choosing any just one trait. Selecting more than like selecting one can cause problems quickly in other areas. So we really want to focus on what are the strengths of a herd and what traits do we want to improve, and then
Mhm.
make our selection decisions from there. And that's where some of the services that we offer may be of very strong support for that. One of which being custom index creation. So on farm, if you've got about 6 or 7 different things that you want to pay attention to, that gives you that strong animal so that their welfare is never at risk and their health is strong, and they're also a very strong genetic animal that can reproduce efficiently. Then you put those traits all into an index and you can weight them on importance. And now you've got something to help you select the animals that do a good job, but on all the aspects that you need to pay attention to.
Hmm. And so with that, do you guys have you had many people that are selecting for things like lice? And that's gonna sound funny, but we actually had two herds come in one year and we fed them all winter together. One, they'd been working on their genetic traits for like 30 years or something, and the other was, 5 years. And they were
Mhm.
selecting for the same things, but different length of time. And when we separated the herd out at the end of the season, there were like all the ones with lice and just didn't look great and were skinny were all in one herd, and then the 30-year herd was in a lot better shape. So do you find producers are looking for things like that are a little bit different?
Yeah, I think the first stage of producing livestock is you focus on your management and how can you minimize cost and find efficiencies. And some easy things are picking up the things you can see. So if that is starting with lice or something else that you can physically see, then that's a great starting point to you are then also genetically selecting, and maybe you don't even realize it because you're culling the animals that don't do that well and you're keeping the ones that can handle it well. So that's genetic selection again, I would say.
Hmm. And then the services you guys offer. So do you walk through sort of what that record keeping would look like? Because I'd imagine too, I mean, let's be real, a lot of the smaller cow-calf producers have it's in the back of dad's head, right?
Mm.
That's where the records are kept. So do you guys walk through kind of how to keep those records and what you're going to be recording?
Yeah, so in our early days, we were very focused on genetics, and that meant that if you're putting animals into our solutions, you had to have certain records in order to successfully do that. Uh, Through the years, we've moved a little bit away from that. We want to help people get to the point where they can see genetic improvement tools helping their operation. But most of the time, that starts with just show us what you collect today and we'll see if we can add value to that and grow you into collecting more that supports down the road genetic selection and maybe in more detailed genetic selection, because I think like the example you just gave, even selecting animals that do that well, you're still genetic selection managing your herd.
Hmm.
It's just we need to bite size it because not everybody is ready to jump to birth weights, weaning weights, tracking pedigrees, and then potentially pulling DNA and going to the genomic aspect of genetic selection. we got to start somewhere and help everybody move to the tools that help them get to where they need to be.
Right, which makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I guess we'll kind of generalize that question a little bit more, but how can genetic selection directly influence the profitability of cattle operations?
By identifying the genetically superior animals, then in your breeding programs, you can use that information to improve the ability of your next crop. And also at the same time, decreasing things that cost you more money. So in the end, you increase your productivity, and that directly relates to environmental sustainability, which is a buzzword and a very important topic today. And so then the beef that you're producing is on less feed, hopefully improves the margin on each calf and requires less inputs. And like I said, some may be doing this with bull selection and not really paying too close attention to the records on their cows.
Hmm.
But that's management practices that are also doing genetic improvement.
So when it comes to that genetic selection, how important is it to find that balance between long-term goals for what the producer's farm is, and then some of the more short-term goals like, okay, this calf crop, we want to get this done.
Yeah. So I think it's very good to have long-term goals because genetic selection is not something that you start today and in 2 weeks you see a lot of benefit from. Um, so it's good to have those long-term goals, and how do I track and benchmark my progress to reaching them? And then short-term goals maybe are more focused on some management related things. So you can see some value and know that you're doing the right things that help you grow to the long-term production increases and quality that you're looking for.
Right. And we talked about how there's a lot of different traits that you might be selecting for. So long term, from what you've seen, how many traits are some producers looking for, right? Like if you have a wide range, because I'm thinking
Mhm.
I could probably list off 10 off the top of my head that I'd want in a herd. Yeah, what are people actually looking for out there?
I really think there's two key traits that people are focused on, probably a good part of the industry is, if not all. The first one being reproduction and being able to just keep that breeding season tight. It gives people a more uniform crop of calves to market and can minimize cost. And then finding those females that breed quickly with minimal human intervention always means that you're saving money, and then maybe you don't have to use so many pharmaceutical products and synchronizing. And the other big one that I would mention is feed efficiency, which continues to be the biggest cost in raising cattle. But we're working with partners on infrared thermal image technology. And we are using that to real time, like I say, real time in about 24 hours, identify animals that are feed efficient. And also directly related to that is their ability to emit methane. Because if they're feed efficient, they're not producing as much methane as another animal that's less efficient. So all of those things can be used to fine tune and focus on that a few traits that in the end improve feed efficiency. Traditionally, we've done that by doing bull tests, and bull tests take about 112 days to actually run the test. And so I'm pretty excited that there's some partners we're working with that get that information in producers' hands more in real time so that they
Mhm.
don't have to spend about 3, 4 months when the costs related to that to find the genetics that can do that well.
Right. And so speaking about the feed value and kind of feed efficiency there, what is the differences have you seen in genetics from people that are doing like 100% grass-fed versus grain? I know that a lot of it has to do with the bugs in the rumen and how they're processing these feed. Does that differ when you're trying to choose genetics, and how much does it differ? So if you just take a grain-fed animal, throw it on grass and be like, you're going to be grass-fed for your entire life,
Mhm.
how much of a difference does that make?
I'm not sure that we have a study yet that proves the difference between those two management styles, but definitely there's going to be animals and combinations of breeds that do each of those well. And I think the challenge that we have ahead of us is using genetics to figure out what that light bulb moment is. Is it all Angus cattle, or is it a hybrid animal that is made up of a few different breeds, like also including Simmental and Charolais and other breeds like that? And I think that that's where genetic improvement needs to continue to grow, and projects need to continue to happen to help producers see that there are different feeding strategies and management strategies that get you a certain level of improvement and increase your margins. But then at some point, you may want to incorporate that genetic selection aspect in your toolbox to see more increases in your productivity and your ability to produce a quality product.
Right. Because I know doing custom grazing, it was always kind of frustrating watching some of the calves that come off of the feedlot, right, have been receiving a bunch of grain. They go onto grass and some would do really well and then others
Yeah.
not so well on it. So that'd be interesting. And I guess that all comes down to record keeping in the long
Yep,
run.
I big supporter of that, because if you don't, you can't manage what you don't measure. Famous quote by Peter Drucker, and we do use that a lot in presentations because I think that comes into every aspect of your life. If you want to make improvements, then you got to start tracking what you're doing to see if you can fine tune what you're doing to do better next time.
Right. And sometimes to even know if you've improved to begin with, right? Because
Yes,
if things happen
absolutely.
over a long period of time, you start to just get used to what the new normal is without noticing it. So how does genetic selection impact the overall genetic diversity of cattle herds? And what are the long-term implications? Because I mean, we are, kind of playing it for certain things, so there's going to be implications in other areas.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the beef industry is very different from the dairy industry because we're made up of over 50 breeds. So genetic selection, there's a need for every breed. And as the commercial industry grows and tries to fine tune how do we get to a consistent quality, we may find, and I'm sure that some already know this, but there's a certain combination of breeds that give you what you're looking for at the end. And it doesn't mean that we don't need the seed stock industry. We really do. And their role in that is to keep breeding the bulls that are giving us that improved quality. But then genetic selection has a place in the commercial industry too, because um, if you're adding bulls into your cow herd for your next crop of calves, it would be really great to know what are the strengths of your cows right now to make sure you're choosing that right bull. And maybe in your rotation, you need to use a different breed to supplement the quality increase that you need in the next crop of calves. And I'm not sure that we know that today, and that's where more records would help us fine tune that.
Right. I would imagine the better the records too, it would almost help you avert a disaster down the road because if you're noticing something year after year and there are some maybe not so positive implications, you might be able to be like, "Oh wait, this is going the wrong direction here." Do you guys see a lot of that with
Absolutely.
the producers you work with? That like they try something and it's like, "Oh wait, this isn't working."
Yeah, for sure. Um, there's easy records that you can keep that are more on phenotypes, and you make selections, and then you got to adjust because the animal doesn't have the structure to support where they need to go. But the same happens with genetic improvement. If you tracked like weaning weights, for example, because that's when cow calf can get to the end product for their stage of the production. And so if you notice that a cow is producing a calf every year, which is great, but that calf costs you a lot of money to feed it, and the weaning weights are not getting better year over year, then maybe that's a cow that you want to consider culling and bringing in a replacement. And if you're managing as a group of calves, it's kind of hard to figure those ones out. And so individual records are ideal, but at the same time, choosing those bulls that increase your weaning weights, even with weaker cows, will still hopefully produce you improvements each year. But again, that's where I would support individual records because it helps you get rid of that bottom 10% and helps you really see some strong improvements year over year.
Do you have a sense of how many producers are actually keeping records already, like good records when they're doing this? Or I know
Hmm.
that's just completely anecdotal at this point, but
Yeah, there's lots of surveys out there. People are keeping records, absolutely. Um, I would throw out there that putting it in a pocketbook that you can use to make your decision next year, I think there's more value you can be getting from that record than what people are seeing today. So I don't want people to think that there isn't a lot of records out there because there is. It's just I would challenge the industry to say I think we can be giving more value on what people are taking the time to write down. And that's where we try to partner with different people in the industry, like Canadian Beef Breeds Council, and focus on things like Canadian Beef Improvement Network to help people see small improvements and want to do more and get more value from the things they're doing right now.
hmm. And with those things that they're doing, I mean, I know most producers will go through their herd, a couple times throughout the summer just to check, make sure everyone's looking good and stuff. And I know there's a lot of talk between like continuous grazing and maybe more of a rotational grazing hands-on. Do you think that there is a high level of importance for just walking through your herd on a regular basis and keeping notes on what each animal is doing separately from, when you first run them through the chute type thing?
Yeah, I do because an animal might look good in certain stages of the year, but then keeping a close eye on them lets you know is there times where they really start to experience more stress or they just don't do well, like maybe the heat is getting to them more or um, there can be lots of different things, but I think just keeping a close monitor on things, and it doesn't mean maybe every day, but every maybe few days, you're keeping an eye on your cow crop and your calf crop, and you're taking notes on what you see. And because at different times of year, you may think, oh yeah, this one's got to be culled next season. And if you're not doing that regular check-in, then it's hard to see that when you're only looking at them maybe a couple times a year.
Or even keeping a note on it, because I know there's been a few times where I walk through the herd and I'm like, yeah, that one didn't look so good. And then I go out the next time, can't find that one. And I'm like, I don't know what number that was. Didn't
Yeah,
write that down. So,
a great example of why record keeping would be helpful because if you're creating a flag on an animal or anything like that, then it's just an easy way for you to be able to have a list to go and pay attention to next time, for sure.
next time. That's great. And so, kind of changing directions here a little bit. Can selecting for certain genetic traits help mitigate some of the risks associated with disease outbreaks or environmental changes? A lot of us have been seeing more extreme weather events. Do you think there's a place for genetic selection in that?
I do. And I think it's echoed by semen companies around the industry as well. A great example is they've been identifying genetics with stronger immunity to disease and marketing those animals. Um, Paying attention to more feed efficient animals, which directly relates to methane emission, definitely has a strong impact on climate change and how animals can use the feed that we can produce and not put that stress on the system of needing increased amounts of feed. We're getting more efficient with the feed that we do have. And yeah, like just broader use of selection decisions has the potential to increase the national herd's ability to minimize disease outbreak and efficiently produce the supply of livestock feed products that we need on a daily basis.
Right. And then speaking about the environmental conditions as well, do you have you seen anything where, herds coming in from, let's say, BC going into the prairies where there's really cold temperatures where they just don't do as well, and that's a surprise to maybe the producers bringing them in? Do you have any, because I'm thinking like genetically, if they've been selected to do well in a certain environment, and I know a lot of people do try to pull bulls from other places in Canada and in the States, right? Is that a consideration that people should be making when bringing a bull in from another location?
I think that's next level record keeping, and we very much support that as well. The best example I can give you recently that we were part of was there's a fair bit of genetics that get relocated or purchased and used in Mexico. And we've got strong partners in the US and Mexico. And I know just earlier this year, I was part of an event in Mexico, and a breeder has traditionally sent animals that way. And I asked him, so are you noticing, you've been doing this for a few years, are you noticing that there's certain genetics lines in your herd that actually perform better in Mexico climate and environment and feed? And his answer, hands down, was absolutely. If someone asked me, I'd like this bull or this line of cattle because they look good in Canada, I really want the next heifer or bull calf off of that line, then this gentleman said there's some where he would just flat out say, I don't recommend it for your area. And until we start tracking where our animals are going and be able to inform our breeders with how those animals perform, then I think that's a missing piece of information that's important to the breeders making those breeding decisions based on the market that they're supplying animals to.
Right. Is there currently a system in place somehow that we can figure out, like, let's say you are growing bulls for other locations. Is there a way of keeping records on where those bulls have gone and, kind of how they're doing in each area?
I'm sure that there's sale records that the breeder can focus on of where did those animals go. And I think most of the people in this space are just keeping a strong relationship with the buyers in those other regions. But I would love to see, and it's one area where we want to focus, is getting the breeders in the end market using a similar application or something that shares that information across, because then it's not labor intensive to find out, well, how are they doing and what considerations do I need to think of in my next breeding selection decisions. So
It would be really neat to see a big database where you could go and, be able to cross-reference all of that information for sure. So speaking kind of about the future now, I've heard quite a bit about QR codes and the possibility of them being used in traceability, that type of thing. I haven't actually seen it done in any of the grocery stores I've shopped in, but what do you think is the potential of that technology in the future when it comes to genetics and knowing where our meat comes from?
mhm. Well, we had a business using QR codes. So when we have our on-farm record keeping system, it's called BioTrack Plus, and the records that it captures, we use to produce genetic evaluations and share that back. And then when we added about 11 years ago our BioLinks program that helps capture the meat quality at the end of it, um, the opportunity with the QR code on the marketing side of the end product means that you can share key pieces of information on the management practices used to produce that animal, and you can have strong trust in the message that you're sharing and potentially talking about the breeds of cattle that make up that strong product. But I think the true power of the QR code is to get more feedback. And this is what a business in Ontario did do for a period. And not sure if they're still doing it, but the QR code enabled them to get consumer feedback on the meat product that they were buying. And so again, when you think of records, that just helps give more information to the people making those breeding decisions on what the end quality was.
That's amazing. I didn't think about that side of it. I thought more on the like, as a consumer, being able to go and know what farm it came
Mm-hmm.
from and, like maybe even how it was fed or how
Mm-hmm.
like just having that story behind it. Because I do feel that there has been kind of a change in dynamics on how much people trust their food that they're buying. So to be able to know exactly where it's coming from would be incredible. Okay, so as you mentioned, like some people were using consumer feedback from the QR codes. And what implications do you think that might have for the farmer? Like, what things do you think that they would want to change based on some
Mm-hmm.
customer feedback?
Well, a couple quick ideas is if you're starting to get consumer feedback and the feedback is this meat is like extremely tender, juicy, a great product, and you start to notice, I get that feedback on most of my animals, but not these other ones. Then maybe if you're considering your meat quality as part of your program, you may want to pay attention to the genetics and see if it's those pedigree lines that traditionally don't get a great feedback as others, and consider that in your management decisions on who to call and who to keep.
That makes a lot of sense. And then with the record keeping as well, do you think that it's just as important to be keeping record of what feed they are getting throughout the year and the feed values, like especially when you think of winter feeding in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're paying attention to feed efficiency, um, you can get so far with a feed program, but like I said before, like at some point, your margins on that aren't going to be as strong as they were before. And if you pay attention to the animals that do well on certain rations, then you can really fine tune your cow crop to be able to do that. And I would say that the other area is keep records on health because we had some members that were able to connect information from on farm into the meat harvesting and the quality of the end product. And right or wrong, some of the animals that weren't as tender had instances of pneumonia. And
Mm.
it's not to say that's what 100% made that animal tough, but until we start connecting that information, it's hard to know. Is it a genetics issue? Is it a management issue? Is it a health issue? And it really will help going forward.
Well, I've also heard that even a couple of day break in growth will impact the product at the end of the line as well. So I guess that plays into that health thing because I mean, realistically, if an animal's sick, it's not going to have the same rate of growth as it would when it's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That's great information. And is there anything that you would like to say to producers, any words of encouragement you'd like to get out there when it comes to genetic selection in their beef herds?
Sure. I would suggest just start somewhere. You probably are starting somewhere, but maybe ask yourself, am I getting enough value from the time that it's taking me now to write down what I am recording on my herd? And just start to put some, what else would I want to know? And then ask people in the industry, is there something out there that can help me with these questions? And I would be the first one to say that AgSights is one option that you can consider. But we want to take a look at what you are doing and where you want it to go. And if the answer is going a different direction than something we offer, then we would be very open to say that. So I guess my first recommendation to farmers is take a look at what you're doing, what else you would like to know, and ask questions and reach out to people in the industry that might help you be able to find what can help add that extra value you're looking for.
I like it. And then, of course, set some long-term goals with that too, so that you know what direction you want to head in.
Absolutely. And then make sure that what you are using helps you benchmark to see, are you progressing to those long-term goals?
That's really good. Well, thank you so much, Betty Jo. It was amazing having you on Ruminating with Real Egg. And where can producers go if they would like to get a hold of you?
You can check out our agsights.com website, or just send me an email, almond, just like the nut, at agsights.com. And happy to answer any questions or have a chat about anything that may be of interest to them.
Great, thank you.